In this video I will discuss the current film industry and its genres with my thoughts on it, including my thoughts on the rumours on Disney selling Lucasfilm or selling the group to Apple. These films start out with the hero setting out either to rescue a kidnapped person, or transporting or protecting someone or something, or trying to stop a madman with a doomsday weapon, or a revenge mission. Run and gun from point A to point B, fight with the villain. Is the hero going to lose? No, of course not. And then you have the end of the film. They are basic and not so brilliant films, and once you've seen a few of them, you've really seen them all, because they share the same generic formulaic plot. These types of film require the paying customer to turn off brain and consume product. They have been a staple for some time, and so long as they are cheap to make and around 90 to 100 minutes long, certainly no more than 2 hours, then they will be in the future. And if they have a low budget, this will increase the chance of profit. I will give an example of an action film gone a bit too nuts in its length, and that is John Wick 4. One big run and gun film that's in fact non-stop, and for John Wick to get his revenge he must go on another run and gun mission to help Winston, and then run and gun some more to get to the big villain. I mean, realistically it's at least an hour too long. That could have been reduced by an hour with no real loss in the limited plot. Secondly, I would like to make this point in terms of John Wick is the punishment that the character of John Wick takes. For instance, falling down a long flight of stairs at Sacre-Cœur, which goes on for far too long. I would ask whether the character would have been granted the same leeway if it had been Jane Wick rather than John Wick. I don't think he would have done, but if you disagree, please leave a comment in the video. Further to this punishment point, with his bulletproof suit that John Wick has, to quote Thanos, "You should have gone for the head." Why didn't this happen? Because the rest of the film couldn't happen if it did. I would also say something similar about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, about this going on for a bit too long. The cat and mouse between Ethan and Grace, for example, and the train sequence at the end. Please see my review for more information on it. These films by themselves won't actually save Hollywood, because there needs to be a variation of different films, including thrillers, or with a bit more plot and stuff like that, in order to get going again. The typical hero film it starts with either a young naive hero setting forth on an adventure, finds companions, he sets up against a British villain, there is a crisis within the group which threatens to break it apart, and something happens or they find out something dark. Then the disunited group then unite to defeat the British villain, which they then do in the end, or an arrogant hero going on some redemption arc throughout the film, or some combination of the two. They're not really revolutionary, and they tend to be bland, generic, formulaic films with heavy CGI, meant to create amongst your audience, "Oh, look at these pretty fight scenes, look at these pretty explosions, and look at these pretty CGI." Again, it's for the consumer to turn off brain and consume product. And remakes are becoming more popular, but suffer from the same issues. CGI heavy, bland, boring, and generic stories which are not as good as the originals. Another issue with superhero films is their budgets, and they've become increasingly large, about $200 to $300 million. Good examples of these are Star Wars films, and a good portion, but not all, of Marvel films. There have been some mid-range Marvel films, well, I say mid-range, but they're $150 to $180 million. And the recent TV series that for both Marvel and Star Wars have been costing the same as a film to produce. It's far too much. And the issue with these ever-ballooning budgets means that because these films have to make 2.5 to 3 times the budget, means that they have to get to $1 billion or more each time at the box office. While these films did this back in the 2010s, they're no longer doing so and are struggling so far in the 2020s. And a point raised by others on YouTube is that when the films are this high, it becomes too big to fail and run by committee, because the budgets are too big, which then in turn leads to bloated, generic, formulaic films being churned out, leading to decreased box office. Another reason for declining box office is fans not liking what Marvel or Lucasfilm or Warner Brothers is doing with a particular franchise under their watch, and realistically, this is unsustainable for for clear business reasons. Because if you're not making money on your films, you're not making that profit, and therefore, if you don't make profit, you're going to go into financial difficulty. Comedy, well, that's been cheap tap with no humour in it, and for some time, and that's really all I've got to say on that. Typically, Hollywood has a fast and loose relationship with history and history films, taking a lot of liberties in showing events that didn't happen for dramatic effect. I like to consider that I'm reasonable at history and have a keen interest in the subject, but the liberties taken tend to annoy me, for example in Sharp or in The Last Kingdom. In both of these shows, in order to make the main plot go forward, the achievements of real historical figures, Wellington and Alfred the Great, respectively, is given to the fictional character, and basically how could the real historical figure really have done what they did without this fictional character? Also, in The Last Kingdom, I am less fond of the main character than I am of Sharp. I just don't find him a likeable character. I realise that if this did not happen, however, in these shows, then you wouldn't really have much of a product to put out, because what would be the point? Also, if you did not dramatise some scenes, then some would actually find the film boring. Again, I understand why they do that. It's not something I'm a fan of, but nevertheless. Also, events have to be simplified to fit into a 2-hour runtime. And whilst again, I get you can't include everything, the simplification of events removes the complexity and what makes it interesting on what was actually happening historically. And because of these films, they're not for me. They're not what I find likeable. There are a few odd ones that are out there, but not many. And if you're able to turn off that part of your brain that objects to this, then perhaps you can get some enjoyment from it. Another example of liberties taken in history films is the more recent Woman King, about an African tribe fighting against white slavers. But in reality, historically, the reverse was actually true, with that particular tribe actually participating in selling other Africans into slavery. Other examples of loose history film is Braveheart and The Patriot. Currently, you seem to have two arguments. One of your mighty paying customer and fan base, who can do no wrong, who made a particular franchise worth what it is, and the current creatives being evil. The other point of view is your mighty creative, who can do no wrong, who make the franchise, and it's the fan base who is evil. Neither one of these is true, and neither side is patently evil. In fact, it actually used to be a symbiotic relationship between the two, because without the creatives like George Lucas or Gene Roddenberry or J.R.R. Tolkien, Agatha Christie, Alice Peter or Stan Lee and others, fans would not have a franchise to coalesce and rally around. And without that fan base coalescing around the franchise, you would not have a franchise that is now worth billions. And it's unfortunate that in my opinion, a lot of these more modern films in the past 15-20 years, most of them are very poor, bland and boring. And, a minority on both sides, especially those who hide behind anonymity online, on Twitter or X as it's now called, 4chan, Reddit, or if you're on YouTube, can go a bit too far on either side. And you don't have to shout or curse constantly at the camera, or putting on one of those childish voices when criticising someone, something someone said. And I think when they're doing this, they're trying to be funny or clever, but they're actually being childish. And it's something that you would actually see on a school playground, not from a grown adult. And on the other side, just because someone criticised a film doesn't mean they're an ism or a phobe or patently evil. And at the end of the day, our opinions on films and content is subjective, and they can be reasonably made. People can agree to disagree, and that's not a problem. And I think a certain degree of calming down on the extremes of the argument needs to occur. Disney is perhaps the best example of what is wrong with Hollywood today. massively overspending on TV shows and films and not getting the return on them, losing 11.7 million subscribers on Disney Plus over the last few quarters, legal cases against Florida, a scorned former producer for the Acolyte TV show taking legal action against them, legal actions from their own shareholders on financial data presented to them, and having a yet to be determined bill for purchasing the rest of Hulu. Initially, the deadline was set by January 2024, but this date has been moved up to the 30th of September 2023, with a rumoured bill of about $9 billion, but from what I understand this could change between now and then. There are currently two rumours going around reference Disney. Is that one, they're going to be selling Lucasfilm to a Middle Eastern businessman who has more money than he knows what to do with for about $8 billion, and the second one being Disney selling to Apple. Now, one doesn't necessarily preclude the other because Disney has to show it is a going concern and thriving business, and the way to do that is to have a healthy balance sheet by showing how their assets compare to their liabilities, their profitability, along with other issues, which in turn affects the share prices which Disney is struggling with, but as well as their profitability. And it is these that I would want to boost to get the best possible price if selling to Apple. This is going to be quite difficult due to their share price being a 9-year low and being downgraded, as well as other issues mentioned earlier. It should also be borne in mind that Disney needs to show that they have security to the banks to get the loans to pay for their TV shows and films to continue producing the product in the meantime. So it really depends upon how desperate Disney gets, whether they can control their budgets, the results of some of the issues mentioned earlier, and whether Iger is able to turn things around or not will determine whether they sell Lucas off separately to steady the ship or potentially as a united package for Apple. But I should stress the point that currently these are rumours only. In addition, with some programming having been taken off Disney Plus as a tax write-off, trying to sell off some of their linear channels and other TV assets, can lead into the argument and rumour for Disney selling off Lucasfilm, but again, to repeat, it depends upon how desperate they get. Warner Bros. Is in a similar position, although I am interested in seeing the Babylon 5 animated film that came out in August, and The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, out next year. With the new TV shows and films on hold due to the strikes in Hollywood, what to do? Well, I would break out the old DVDs and Blu-rays with classic films and TV series like older Trek films. My favourite of these films is Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Voyage Home, and The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek Generations, and First Contact. I'd break out old Trek TV series. My favourite is DS9. The older Star Wars series films, the prequels, the originals and the Clone Wars series. Older Doctor Who, both the original and up to a point the renewed series. Not Torchwood though, I never really got into that. The Lord of the Rings extended editions are very good films. Even the Hobbit films, which while not as good as the Lord of the Rings, they aren't that bad either, although I will acknowledge that they are quite long and they are quite bloated in places, especially considering the length of the book, and really could have been condensed into at least 4.5 hour films, or 2.5 hour films at most, not 3.5 hour films. The original Predator is again a good film. It combines sci-fi, thriller and action elements very well. The original Total Recall, again another good film. A Bridge Too Far, one of the few history films that I do actually like. Bridge Over the River Kwai, again another very good classic film. Babylon 5 is another good show. The visual effects, however, do look like an old 1990s computer game, but it's a good show nevertheless. Farscape and Stargate are good shows as well, and whichever films or TV shows you're into, break those out as well. Alternatively, if you're interested in more educational material, then I would suggest checking out thegreatcourses.com. They have plenty of interesting box sets on history, science, religion, philosophy, and I would recommend checking them out. And try and watch out for when they have special offers on, because periodically they reduce the price of their box sets to about £15 per box set, which is the time to buy it. And usually they're 24 half-hour episodes, but sometimes they do have 12, 36 or 48 half-hour episodes, but mainly they're 24. The retort I would expect to some of the films and TV series mentioned above is to reference the culture wars and the destruction of the franchises and the decreasing returns. making the originals unwatchable? And my reply is no, it doesn't make the originals unwatchable, and the franchise is only destroyed if you let it. And with the culture wars, I am reminded of a phrase used to describe the Roman army: make a desert and call it victory. And this goes for either side, because for some who declare they are no longer fans of a particular franchise and they're walking off into their own desert, leaving nothing left, and they're actually helping in the destruction of what they say they're fans of many years. And with this in mind, what's the point of the culture war by the end of it? Because what's left for either side? Nothing, apart from rage clicks. I mean, it's like winning a war but losing the peace, and mutually assured destruction. I mean, would it not be better to keep what you love about a franchise alive by separating what you love about it against what you don't, and keeping what you like and discarding what you don't like, instead of just throwing everything in the bin because of some bad, bland, generic films, combined with a loudmouth director, producer and writer who badmouths fans or critics of the film, or whoever else who offers opinions that differs from their own, criticising their work. Let them go off into their own desert and let them stay there. Then that would be my answer to that. And further to this, if you don't like the more modern stuff, then don't make that part of your collection and focus on the older stuff that you like. If you like the more modern stuff but not the old, then do the exact same in reverse. Or if you're somewhere in between, pick and choose what your preferences are. And none of these should be controversial, divisive, or the end of the world. On a personal note, I am more partial to older TV series, comedies, films and adaptations than new ones, and I think TV and film generally has declined in quality over the past 20 years or so. I mean, there have been a few film and TV series within the past 20 years that were released that have been good, but generally I think they're quite bland, formulaic, generic and boring, with typically an A to B plot, or CGI fest, or some combination of the two. Thank you for checking out this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.